Denmark's royal family just made a devastating announcement, the news that shattered a nation. Welcome to BNews. How do you tell an entire nation that everything is about to change forever? On December 4, 2024, at precisely 10 a.m. Copenhagen time, the Danish royal family released an announcement so devastating, so utterly unexpected, that it has left Denmark in a state of collective shock and disbelief. We're not talking about a scandal, a divorce, or another family dispute. We're talking about a decision so profound and consequential that it will fundamentally alter the course of Danish history and force every Danish citizen to confront questions about identity, tradition, and the future of their nation that they never imagined having to answer. Within minutes of the official statement being posted on the Royal House website and transmitted through every major Danish media outlet, the reaction was immediate and visceral. People stopped mid-conversation in Copenhagen cafes. Parents pulled their children close while reading the news on their phones. Elderly Danes who remember Queen Margrethe's coronation in 1972 wept openly. Young Danes who had been ambivalent or even skeptical about monarchy suddenly felt an unexpected hollowness, a sense that something essential to their national identity was slipping away. The announcement has triggered a national crisis unlike anything Denmark has experienced in peacetime, a crisis not of violence or economic collapse, but of meaning, continuity, and the very question of what it means to be Danish in a world where the thousand-year thread connecting present to past has just been severed. The devastating announcement, delivered in a somber video message from King Frederik X flanked by Queen Mary, with former Queen Margrethe seated beside them in a rare public appearance since her abdication, contained words that no Danish citizen ever expected to hear from their monarch. After acknowledging the gravity of what he was about to say and expressing his deep love for Denmark and its people, King Frederik announced that after extensive consultation with constitutional experts, parliamentary leaders, and his own family, he has made the decision to propose the formal dissolution of the Danish monarchy, to be accomplished through a constitutional amendment and national referendum to be held in 2026. The king stated that this decision comes not from scandal, exhaustion, or any single crisis, but from a profound recognition that the institution of hereditary monarchy, however beloved and historically significant, is no longer compatible with the democratic values and egalitarian principles that define modern Denmark. In measured but emotion-laden words, King Frederik explained that he has spent the past year wrestling with an impossible contradiction. How can he, in good conscience, represent a nation that prides itself on equality, meritocracy, and democratic governance while his own position is based entirely on the accident of birth? How can he ask Danish citizens to accept that some people are inherently more valuable, more worthy of privilege and public resources, simply because of their bloodline? But before we explore the full scope of this devastating announcement and the national trauma it has unleashed, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and have notifications turned on, because this is the story that will define Denmark's future and we'll be covering every development as this unprecedented situation unfolds. And if you're already as stunned by this announcement as the entire nation of Denmark, hit that like button to show your support for journalism that doesn't look away from the moments when history changes before our eyes. Now, let's examine exactly what King Frederik said, why this decision is so devastating, and what it means for the future of Denmark and monarchies worldwide. The king's announcement continued with a detailed explanation of his reasoning, and it's this explanation that has cut so deeply into the Danish consciousness. King Frederik spoke about his children, Crown Prince Christian, Princess Isabella, and twins Prince Vincent and Princess Josephine, and the burden he has watched them struggle with as they come of age knowing that their entire lives have been predetermined by birth. He described watching his eldest son, Christian, now 19 years old, grapple with the knowledge that he will one day be king whether he wants that role or not, that his life will never truly be his own, that every choice he makes must be filtered through the requirements of an institution created a millennium ago. The king spoke of the conversations he and Queen Mary have had with their children, conversations where his sons and daughters have asked questions he couldn't answer satisfactorily. Why them? Why should they have to live under this extraordinary pressure and scrutiny? What makes their blood more valuable than any other Danish citizens? King Frederik admitted that he had no good answers to these questions, only appeals to tradition, duty, and history, appeals that felt increasingly hollow when confronted with his children's fundamental concerns about fairness and choice. The announcement then addressed the broader institutional concerns that led to this devastating decision. King Frederik acknowledged the ongoing tensions within the royal family, particularly the estrangement from his brother Prince Joachim, and admitted that this family dysfunction has revealed fundamental problems with an institution that depends entirely on family harmony and unity to function effectively. He spoke about the financial questions that have plagued the monarchy, the growing public skepticism about whether the resources devoted to maintaining the royal household could be better used for education, healthcare, and social services. He referenced the generational divide in attitudes toward monarchy, noting that while older Danes still hold strong affection for the institution, younger Danes increasingly question its relevance and fairness. Most devastatingly, King Frederik stated that he has come to believe that the monarchy's very existence, however well-intentioned, perpetuates a principle, hereditary privilege, that contradicts everything else Denmark stands for as a nation. Denmark has built one of the world's most successful societies by embracing equality, by creating systems where everyone has opportunity regardless of birth, by rejecting the idea that some people inherently deserve more than others. How, the king asked, can Denmark credibly maintain these values while simultaneously accepting that one family, his family, deserves special status, special treatment, and special resources simply because of ancestry? The proposed timeline and mechanism for the monarchy's dissolution were laid out with careful specificity, making clear that this isn't an impulsive decision but a carefully considered constitutional process. King Frederik announced that he will continue to serve as monarch through 2025, fulfilling all constitutional and ceremonial duties while working with Parliament to draft the constitutional amendments necessary to transition Denmark to a parliamentary republic. During this period, a commission composed of constitutional experts, historians, political scientists, and citizen representatives will be established to design the specific structure of Denmark's post-monarchical government, whether the head of state role will be filled by a president elected by parliament or by popular vote, what ceremonial and diplomatic functions will need to be maintained, how state properties currently associated with the monarchy will be managed, and countless other details that must be resolved. In 2026, Danish citizens will vote in a binding referendum on whether to accept these constitutional amendments and formally transition to a republic. King Frederik emphasized that this is not a unilateral abdication but a democratic process. He is proposing this change, but ultimately the Danish people will decide their own future. If Danes vote to retain the monarchy, he stated that he will respect that decision and continue to serve as king. However, he also made clear his belief that the proposal represents the right path forward and his hope that Danes will embrace the opportunity to become a fully democratic republic where every citizen stands equal and where leadership is earned through merit rather than inherited through blood. The immediate reaction across Denmark has been nothing short of devastating grief mixed with profound confusion. In Copenhagen's Amalienborg Palace Square, where crowds began gathering within minutes of the announcement, scenes of collective mourning unfolded that evoke memories of national tragedies. Elderly women wept openly, holding photographs of Queen Margrethe from her coronation. Middle-aged men stood in stunned silence, unable to process what they had just heard. Young parents tried to explain to their children what this meant, struggling to find words for something they themselves couldn't fully comprehend. The atmosphere was one of bereavement, not the explosive anger of a betrayal, but the deep, hollow sadness of losing something irreplaceable. Danish flags hung at half-mast across the country, not by official decree but by spontaneous public sentiment. Flowers began appearing outside royal residences, as if Danes were mourning the death of the monarchy even though it technically still exists for another year. Social media filled with expressions of loss, with people sharing memories of royal moments that had marked their lives: Queen Margrethe's silver jubilee, Frederik and Mary's wedding, the births of royal children, countless ceremonial occasions that had provided continuity and meaning through decades of change. The political response has been unprecedented in its complexity and the difficulty of formulating any coherent position. Denmark's parliament found itself facing a situation that no Danish political party had ever prepared for. How do you respond when your constitutional monarch proposes to abolish his own position? The Prime Minister, in a hastily convened press conference, appeared visibly shaken and struggled to articulate a government position. She praised King Frederik's integrity and his commitment to democratic principles, acknowledged that his concerns about hereditary privilege raise legitimate philosophical questions, but also noted that the monarchy has served Denmark well and that such a fundamental change to the nation's constitutional structure requires the most careful deliberation. Opposition party leaders were similarly conflicted. Some saw the king's proposal as courageous and principled, others viewed it as a catastrophic abandonment of Danish heritage and identity. Still others found themselves politically paralyzed between their party's traditional positions on monarchy and the reality that the king himself was advocating for change. What has become clear is that Danish politics has been completely upended. Traditional left-right divisions offer little guidance on how to approach a question this fundamental, and politicians are recognizing that they'll need to navigate this issue with extraordinary care given how emotionally charged it is for the Danish people. The international reaction has been equally dramatic, with royal houses across Europe reportedly in emergency sessions trying to understand what Denmark's decision means for them. British royal commentators have expressed shock and concern, with some suggesting that if Denmark abolishes its monarchy, it could trigger a domino effect across Europe as other nations question whether their own royal families remain viable or desirable. The Swedish and Norwegian royal families, Denmark's closest Nordic cousins, are reportedly devastated, not just because of the personal relationships between the families, but because Denmark's move raises uncomfortable questions about their own institutions. If the Danes, known for their pragmatism and social progressiveness, decide that monarchy is incompatible with their values, how long before Swedes and Norwegians reach the same conclusion? Spanish, Belgian, and Dutch royals are watching with intense concern, recognizing that King Frederik's philosophical arguments about hereditary privilege and democratic values could just as easily be applied to their own situations. The consensus among international royal watchers is that Denmark's devastating announcement represents the most significant challenge to European monarchy since the wave of abolitions following World War I, and that the outcome of Denmark's 2026 referendum will have implications far beyond Danish borders. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this devastating announcement is the personal dimension, the visible pain in King Frederik and Queen Mary's faces as they delivered the news, the presence of former Queen Margrethe lending her support to a decision that must represent the destruction of everything she spent her life building and preserving. Sources close to the royal family, speaking anonymously to Danish media, describe the past months as agonizing for everyone involved. King Frederik apparently spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with this decision, consulting with philosophers, ethicists, historians, and constitutional experts, writing and rewriting his reasoning, and ultimately concluding that his duty to democratic principles outweighed his duty to an institution built on anti-democratic foundations. Queen Mary, who gave up her Australian citizenship in her previous life to become Danish royalty, reportedly struggled enormously with a decision that would render that sacrifice meaningless, but ultimately agreed that the philosophical arguments were sound even if the emotional cost was devastating. Former Queen Margrethe, now 84 years old and having devoted her entire adult life to the monarchy, reportedly wept when her son first told her of his decision, but eventually gave her blessing, stating that if Frederik truly believes this is what Denmark needs, she will support him even though it breaks her heart. The reaction from Prince Joachim, King Frederik's estranged brother, has added another layer of complexity to this already devastating situation. In a statement released hours after the king's announcement, Prince Joachim expressed support for his brother's decision and revealed that he had been consulted about it in advance. Joachim stated that while the family rift had been painful, he respected Frederik's courage in confronting the fundamental contradictions of monarchy and that perhaps the dysfunction within their own family had helped reveal why hereditary institutions are inherently problematic. This unexpected show of solidarity between the brothers, coming after a year of estrangement, has added a bittersweet note to the tragedy. The family is reuniting in agreement, but only to dismantle the institution that defined them. Some observers have suggested that King Frederik's decision may have been influenced by the recognition that the family tensions were unfixable within the monarchical structure, and that only by moving beyond monarchy could the family heal and find new ways of relating to each other as equals rather than as positions within a hierarchical system. The generational divide in reactions to this devastating announcement is striking and illuminating. Among Danes over 65, the response has been overwhelmingly one of grief, loss, and opposition to the king's proposal. These older Danes grew up with Queen Margrethe as a constant presence, a symbol of stability and continuity through decades of enormous social change. For them, the monarchy isn't just a political institution, it's woven into their identity, their sense of who they are as Danes, their connection to a history stretching back to Viking times. The idea of Denmark without a monarch feels like losing a part of themselves, like cutting away something essential to Danish identity. Many in this demographic have stated flatly that they will vote against the referendum, that they cannot accept the abolition of something so fundamental regardless of the philosophical arguments. However, among Danes under 40, the reaction has been far more mixed and surprisingly supportive of the king's reasoning. Many younger Danes, while acknowledging feelings of sadness and loss, have expressed respect for King Frederik's willingness to question his own position and to prioritize democratic principles over personal privilege. Comments from this demographic often include phrases like, "I didn't expect to support abolishing the monarchy, but the king's arguments make sense," and, "It's strange to say this, but I think he's right," we can't keep pretending hereditary privilege is okay. This generational divide suggests that even if the 2026 referendum fails and Denmark retains its monarchy, the long-term trends are clear. Younger generations are increasingly uncomfortable with the philosophical contradictions that monarchy represents. The economic and practical implications of abolishing the monarchy are now being furiously calculated by economists, lawyers, and policy analysts. What happens to the extensive royal properties, palaces, estates, art collections, and other assets that have been accumulated over centuries? The commission established to plan the transition will need to determine which properties become state museums, which might be sold or repurposed, and how the historical and cultural value of these assets will be preserved. What happens to the hundreds of people employed by the royal household, palace staff, security personnel, communications professionals, and countless others whose careers have been devoted to serving the monarchy? The government will need to develop transition plans, retraining programs, and alternative employment for these individuals. What happens to the countless organizations, charities, and institutions that have royal patronage? New structures for supporting these entities will need to be created. The economic analysis suggests that abolishing the monarchy might actually save Danish taxpayers money in the long run. The costs of maintaining royal households, security, and infrastructure exceed what would be needed for a simpler presidential system, but there are also concerns about losing tourism revenue associated with royal pageantry and the international prestige that monarchy provides. The cultural and psychological dimension of this devastating announcement may be even more significant than the political and economic implications. Denmark is a small country that has always punched above its weight culturally and economically, and the monarchy has been a key part of that outsized influence. It provided Denmark with international recognition, with a unique identity that distinguished it from other Nordic nations, with a living connection to Viking history and medieval kingdoms. Without the monarchy, what becomes of Danish identity? Is it fundamentally altered, or do Danes discover that their identity was never really dependent on hereditary royalty in the first place? These are questions that cannot be answered in advance. They will only be resolved through the lived experience of what Denmark becomes in the post-monarchical era, should that come to pass. Psychologists and sociologists are noting that nations, like individuals, can experience identity crises when fundamental aspects of self-understanding are called into question, and that Denmark is now entering such a crisis whether the monarchy is ultimately retained or abolished. Religious and philosophical leaders across Denmark have weighed in on the announcement with diverse perspectives that reveal the deep complexity of the questions King Frederik has raised.